Hello, Dane. I want to talk about a prison that I experience viscerally and perhaps some of the reasons that I participate in it. It's 1 or 2 in the morning now, and I've spent the day sick, waking up with a headache. Now, what that has to do is tension in my kind of base of the skull and shoulder area. So there's super tension there, and then there's another tension in my sphincter muscles that kind of numbs out my legs. Now, both of these tensions relate to a terror that I have an interesting relationship with. It's familiar, meaning I know it from my family. It's a sensation that comforted me in traumatic nights, falling asleep crying. It was the feeling that was there for me, right? So when I feel lonely, when I feel disoriented, when I feel traumatized, I ground back to that family pattern, and the comfort that it provided. And there's a certain young part of me that feels like all is well with the world. I know that feeling. I'm back in that feeling. I can relax. I feel comforted. At the same time, the feeling itself of tightening those muscles so much, out of the fear of death, out of the fear of terror, are stressful, painful, numbing feelings. And so there's a fear of going outside of that identity, right? It's a very small identity. And there's a certain peace in that small identity. I don't want to look up. I don't want to see. I don't want to leave this little identity. It's a very stressful, it's a very scary identity. But it's also family. It's peaceful. It's familiar. Well, this identity will make me sick. There's pressure, there's headache, there's shortness of breath, there's heaviness, there's numbness, I don't want to move. That creates a kind of a throbbing sensation in my temples, pressure in my eyes. I've got to do something, but I don't want to do something. I don't want to look up. I've got to do something. I don't want to do something. And so this is 70% of my energy. And when I look up and look out, it's like, how do I respond? Like, present me doesn't know how to respond to past me. Present me doesn't have anything so stable, meaning so familiar, as past me. Past me has this terrified tension to remember, to reassemble. Present me has, a lot of past feelings. Afraid I'm going to be found out. Afraid I'm going to be seen and shamed in some way. So that's past feelings, those same terrors. But also afraid I'm going to lose myself. I'm going to die. I'm going to go into the unknown beyond that pattern, that identity. Makes me a little bit sick, right? Feel headache, feel sick, like what to do, right? So I just kind of lay around, try to stress my neck, try to move within the prison bars. Doesn't work, just stays there for a while. And then, right, release. On the other side of all that terror, release. It has its own cycle, that identity from the past. Now, if I get too happy, if things start going too well, if things start moving too smoothly, that part of me doesn't know who it is, where it's going, what's happening, what's the protection. There's an anxiety, there's a trauma. And the answer is to go back to the familiar body sensation, that I know who I am. That trauma or that anxiety and uncertainty releases, but the trauma is relived and its coping mechanism. I do not, because this is exhausting, I don't have a lot of energy left over to do anything about it. Because it is a mind-numbing headache, I don't have a lot of clarity thought to how to think through it. Because it is a physiological memory, and because it wants to be there, and parts of me want to hold on to it, like, where am I in this conversation as a present-day person? Was I consulted with, do you want to feel sick and crippling stress and numbness and headache today? No, I wasn't consulted. Does it come up as an urgent instinct to relive that? Yes. Do I, who haven't been consulted about this tension of, different responses in the situation, do I get a say? Yes, somewhat, right? I get to decide do I eat? Do I not eat? Do I drink? Do I not drink? Do I rest? Do I not rest? Do I try and get something done? Do I try to numb out? I get a little bit of, consulting about some of that, but not much. And so, I generally just try to roll with it. If I get too headachy, I take a nap. If I don't want to move, I watch TV. If I feel small and scared and don't want to face anyone, I stay in the house. And I have the freedom to indulge these dynamics. But that freedom is both a blessing and a curse, meaning because I have that freedom, I indulge those parts. Because I indulge those parts, there's not a lot of shift. And I don't really know what to do in response to this. This video is, I guess, my best attempt to bring some awareness to what is a regular pattern. Yesterday, I had a fabulous day of kind of feeling joy for no particular reason. And I think this is a backlash from that, meaning I think the young traumatized parts are afraid of being left behind in some way and say, what happened to our safe place in all that terror? Because one of the things I think most people don't understand, and that I learned in the process of doing work with PTSD, is that the greatest terror is not a familiar terror. The greatest terror is of not knowing who we are. And so in the moments after trauma and not knowing who I was and being in shock and trauma, after those moments, the identity, the pattern that emerged for me was hypertension, looking down and being terrified, and and sleeping and hiding and not looking at anyone. And that's a very strong memory. It's a strong pattern. It's a strong identity. And so my eye grabbed that identity. And the identity was solid. It was terrifying. It was horrible, but nobody took it away from me. And so it protects and protected me from the unknown. And so when when there's uncertainty and overwhelm, which is common as a sensitive person, it's common as a person with PTSD, it's a little bit of a cycle, right? The overwhelm, I grab to the most familiar identity, which is the traumatic coping mechanism of hypertension and shame and all of that, which has been very solid. So the uncertainty is answered with the solidness, but the solidness of that identity makes it very difficult to navigate in daily life, so it creates a new anxiety and a new uncertainty of how do I respond to a world in which I can't function. And the answer is to go back to the safest familiar identity, which is the terror and the stress and the hypertension, which is causing the problem, right? And so the thing to understand is that a drowning man will desperately grasp for anything, including a board filled with rusty nails. Now, the rusty nails may give them tetanus. The rusty nails may puncture their body. The rusty nails may cause all kinds of pain. But the drowning person will grab for the rusty nails and the board for dear life because it is the only thing solid, right? And that's what happens with traumatic shock is dissociation, the identity is shattered, and flailing around, we grab something that seems solid, in this case, hypertension, body, and this imagery. And there's relief from the unknown and from the shock. But now there's a dysfunctional pattern that precludes all kinds of functioning and growing. Right? So then the PTSD sets in when there aren't many patterns that are that solid. And so you relive and you relive and you relive the process of feeling shocked and disoriented and the process of grabbing on to the coping mechanism, whatever it is. Could be a coping mechanism of cutting yourself. Could be a coping mechanism of shaking. It could be a coping mechanism of hiding and refusing to move. Whatever the pattern was, until the trauma is lifted and integrated, the traumatic memory, the rusty nails are often the thing that we grab to. So I'm somewhat surfacing after 12 hours of being in the throes of all that. And that's as much as I see. And I do not see what to do about it, because if I venture too far from this pattern, I feel terror, I feel anxiety, and I go right back into it. Right? So at some point, it's more relaxing to relive the terror and all that energy than it is to try and do something new that brings up new terror, all of which I do not know how to deal with.